Have you heard about the new movie Toys? No? Great! Oh, great! They didn't hear about the movie! Toys! It's coming out at Christmas!
Toys, rated PG-13. Starts tomorrow at theaters everywhere.
In 1979, writer-director Barry Levinson had just read a newspaper article about how Russian Navy SEALs had supposedly gotten secret information about American nuclear submarines after buying model submarine kits in toy shops.
You can tell it's Prevail.
Now interested in the concept of how simple children's products could be used as complex military disguises, similar to how baby boomers generally believe that games like Pokemon Go causes gun violence, Levinson became interested in turning this idea into a full-feature film. He had already worked on a script alongside his then-wife, Valerie Curtin, and by late 1979, had already finished the first draft of the movie. And not long after, got in touch with movie studio 20th Century Fox to start production of the movie. Fox was interested in the concept so much that they actually bought the rights to the project. Principal photography was expected to start by April of 1980 next year, with Levinson getting a budget of around $7 million and a 10-week shooting schedule in Los Angeles. However, that would all soon backfire when new management was taking over back at 20th Century Fox. And new management sometimes means new executives. So, of course, the executives who initially approved the idea of Toys were immediately fired from the studio. And because of the new executives' intense speculation about the movie's marketability and the projected cost that would potentially balloon the budget to an even higher cost, in addition to the fact that Levinson had never directed a full feature film before this, the project eventually came to a halt. So Levinson had to sadly move on to other projects. But he wasn't just gonna give up from there, because while his actual directorial debut, Diner, opened to critical success, Levinson had already moved Toys to other studios. And as soon as Levinson's career began to project during the 1980s, with a multitude of critically successful films, he began to secretly pitch the idea of Toys behind the scenes. And one of those studios he pitched to? And already seeing the potential that Levinson had as a director, they already planned to produce the movie out of 39 other movies that they were going to release by the next years of the late 80s. But this would all change, however, when Levinson got attached to direct Good Morning Vietnam, starring Robin Williams. Which surprisingly opened to critical and commercial success, in addition to Robin Williams getting an Oscar nomination for Best Actor. And following the success of that film, the then president of Fox, Leonard Goldberg, kinda saw the unmarked potential that Levinson had as a filmmaker, and kind of refused to give up the rights to the film. I forgot to point out that at this moment, 20th Century Fox still had the rights to Toys, so though he was initially hesitant to start the project head-on, even if there were talks of Williams becoming interested to star in the film. But that would all change, however, once again, when Barry Levinson became attached to a movie called Rain Man in 1988.
And the Oscar goes to Barry Levinson for Rain Man.
This film instantly put Levinson up the spotlight, grossing about $300 to $400 million across a $25 million budget, further expanding Dustin Hoffman's career as an established actor, and further establishing Tom Cruise as a profitable Hollywood star. And above all, winning 4 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director for Levinson. This officially put Toys up the map, as the new president of Fox, Joe Roth, finally approved the project in 1990. The film was already planned to go into pre-production, but it wasn't as smooth as Levinson thought it would be. There have been several disagreements between Levinson's vision and the executive's vision of the movie. Levinson had intended for this movie to be more whimsical with a slightly dark comedic edge, while the executives were more lenient on the darkly comedic angle that Levinson had been planning on. All these sparked debates and delays eventually forced Levinson to direct another project he became attached to, Bugsy, which Levinson intended to direct after the release of Toys. After Bugsy released in December of 1991 to critical acclaim, Levinson returned to Fox to make a deal with the executives and officially start principal photography. With the budget already estimating up to $40 million, Levinson agreed to turn the plot relatively simple to make up for the extraordinarily complex production design and surrealist tone which the movie would present itself in. It should also be noted that Robin Williams was already at the peak of his popularity following his roles in Dead Poet Society, The Fisher King, Hook, and Aladdin, the latter of which was released a month earlier before Toys, but we'll talk more about that later. Principal photography finally kicked off on February 25 of 1992. It was estimated that about 50 sound stages were built inside the Fox lot, which eventually caused the film to shut down mid-production in order to construct more space inside the studio's lot for more sets to be built. The outdoor scenes involving the wheat fields were shot outside the Palouse River Valley, and while the estimated budget was counted to be $50 million, it was eventually reduced when Williams, Levinson, and producer Mark Johnson agreed to cut half of their salaries to give back to the film's massive budget, which already spiked back the film's final estimated budget at the time to be around $43 million, which is roughly about $90 million in today's climate. Shooting finally ended by around June of 1992, and the moment Levinson gave the final cut to the executives, they were pretty much puzzled as to how they could even market this film, as the film's surrealist and tonally messy mix of military satire and whimsical children's production design was pretty much impossible to market without any kind of movie star power. This is when one of them suddenly got an idea. You see, since Robin Williams had just got off voicing the genie in Aladdin, and everyone was pretty much finding amusement at just how great he was at improvising, the idea came to an executive's head. The solution? Make Robin Williams pitch the movie himself.
Toys! Trailer! Toys! Toys!
Toys. Well, it's like Toys in the Hood.
Toys! You got a movie about toys. When's a good time to bring it out? Not the toy maker. Dun 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 dun. Toys!
With the studio needing this film to cross at least $100 million for it to become commercially successful, they crossed their fingers and set out their release date on December 18 of 1992. The movie released across 1,272 theaters in the US and Canada, opening at number 6 at the box office right behind The Bodyguard, Forever Young, A Few Good Men, Home Alone 2, and, wouldn't you know it, Aladdin. The movie grossed about $4.8 million in its opening weekend, ultimately culminating around $23 million worldwide overall during its final run in theaters. And this was across a $43 million budget, mind you. Critics and audiences at the time weren't that much pleased with the movie either, with a 26% critic score and a 39% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, and a 5.1 IMDb rating.
The film seems to be split down the middle between the delightful first half and a second half that doesn't deliver on the early promise.
I got sort of angry at this movie. I really didn't like it, and I think it's because they didn't have a really good idea in the picture. What is the point of the film? You sit there and think...
See, that's what you're asking during the last hour.
Though, despite the film's absolutely destructive reception, the film did claim 2 Oscar nominations, which leaned towards the costume and production design. However, that sadly would not make up for what the film would receive after, as Levinson would soon become nominated for Worst Director at the Razzie Awards, losing to David Seltzer for Shining Through. Barry Levinson would soon go on to defend the film, calling it the most criticized movie he's had, but the one he still deeply cares about. And all of this criticism and box office failure ultimately leads to the question, what was this movie? You know those liminal space looking shots I showed in the beginning of this video? Well, that's basically half of what this movie is. Barry Levinson stated that the movie's costume and production design was heavily inspired by Rene Magritte and Fortunato de Pero. 2 of Magritte's paintings were also evident during one of the movie's scenes. And even the poster itself with Robin Williams in her bright red bowler hat. These influences give the movie a dreamy and almost nostalgic look that now feels reminiscent of a Windows XP background, a Frutiger Aero picture, or those Dreamcore or liminal space aesthetics that's pretty much everywhere around social media. Additionally, the 90s synth score produced by Trevor Horn and Hans Zimmer gives the movie more of its nostalgic appeal, which makes every exterior scene feel distant, childhood-like, and eerily warm in its presentation. Now looking back at it, it pretty much makes sense why the movie's aesthetic would be so polarizing with audiences back then. Because before the backrooms took over the modern standard of nostalgic ambience, this movie was pretty much the starting point for those aesthetics, because essentially, this was the aesthetic of the 90s, and most audiences didn't quite find solace in that back then. It would also make sense why the movie's negative reception would be so heavy, because while Levinson did try his best to balance dark military satire with whimsical childhood set pieces, it created a dissonance, losing its focus to the main target of what makes these two pieces work together, ultimately causing this movie to lose balance and leaving many to call it, quote, a strange mess. It should also be noted that while the execution of the premise ultimately falls flat, the main message can be seen as scarily ahead of its time, given the news and articles about drone warfare attacks that would be evident all across the world.
What happens if you don't need a pilot? What happens if you just have remote control planes that carry deadly weapons? Can you imagine what it'd be like if we perfected a toy-sized plane that had deadly fighting capabilities?
Drone and missile attacks on the
Iranian
United
drone
Arab
has
Emirates
hit
are
a
making the situation
building in
particularly
Dubai.
complicated.
Can you imagine the savings if we reduced the cost of planes, say, $450 million a piece, down to $5,000? That's what I'm talking about.
This movie shouldn't exist in the way it presents itself. It's too creepy for kids and too weird for adults. It's a movie that's ultimately for a niche audience. An audience that was due 30 years later when the backrooms had become popular. Is it a mess? Narratively, yes. Aesthetically though, not as much as people exaggeratingly make it out to be. For a movie about using toys as military weapons, it became surprisingly accurate as years passed. Would a passion project for a movie that costs around $40 to $50 million, made for a specific kind of niche audience like this, be made again? For something that's not produced by A24 or Neon, not so much. But all I can say, this movie is an anti-corporate fever dream that reminds me of my childhood, and I honestly can't believe it's owned by Disney now.